What is the most hilarious historical fact you know? Story 1. Notorious pirate hunter Benjamin Hornigold once attacked a ship just to steal all of the crew members' hats. His men had gotten drunk and lost their hats during a party the night before and decided to board a ship to get replacements. Story 2. Brazil and France almost went to war because they had a disagreement about lobsters. The event is known as the Lobster War. France thought lobsters swim, therefore they were above Brazilian soil and could be fished by any vessel, and Brazil thought lobsters crawled on the ocean's floor, therefore are Brazilian property. Brazil's foreign affairs minister had this to say about it: "The attitude of France is inadmissible, and our government will not retreat. The lobster will not be caught." It ended when they agreed that actually lobsters don't crawl nor swim, they leap. Story 3. Julius Caesar had a letter dispatched via messenger while the Senate was in session. Convinced he was sending a message to his collaborators, Senator Cato the Younger demanded that the letter be read in open session to be entered into the annals of the Senate forever. Caesar allowed the letter to be read, and thus the most filthy love letter Caesar had written to his lover at the time, Cato's half-sister Servilia, got entered into historical record forever. A burn so big, people still talk about it 2,100 years later. Story 4. The marathon at the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis. The first place finisher did most of the race in a car. He had intended to drop out, and got a car back to the stadium to get his change of clothes, and just kind of started jogging when he heard the fanfare. The second place finisher was carried across the finish line, legs technically twitching, by his trainers. They had been refusing him water, and giving him a mixture of brandy and rat poison for the entire race. Doping wasn't illegal yet, and this was a terrible attempt at it, so he got the gold when the first guy was revealed. Third finisher was unremarkable, somehow. Fourth finisher was a Cuban mailman, who had raised the funds to attend the Olympics by running non-stop around his entire country. He landed in New Orleans, and promptly lost all of the traveling money on a riverboat casino. He ran the race in dress shoes and long trousers, cut off at the knee by a fellow competitor with a knife. He probably would have come in first, well, second, behind the car, had it not been for the hour nap he took on the side of the track after eating rotten apples he found on the side of the race. 9th and 12th finishers were from South Africa, and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation. These were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. 9th was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Note, these are the first Africans to compete in any modern Olympic event. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had one water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, lead to the above fatalities. And yet, somehow, rat poison guy survived to get the gold. The Russian delegation arrived a week late, because they were still using the Julian calendar. In 1904. Seriously. This needs to be a movie. Story 5. Charondas was a celebrated lawmaker in Catania, in present-day Sicily. Diodorus Siculus stated that Charondas issued a law that anyone who brought weapons into the assembly must be put to death. Charondas ran to the assembly one day because he was being ambushed and he wanted help. Unfortunately, he still had a sword attached to himself, so in order to uphold his own law, he committed suicide. Story 6. A very seldom mentioned fact about Louis Riel, leader of the Métis Nation and most written about man in Canadian history, is that he was so devoted to his resistance movement that he sold everything he owned to get more ammunition for his soldiers. This included his clothing. When he was finally captured in Batoche, he was stark naked. No one really knows how long he'd been running around like that, since his soldiers had been shoot nails and would out of their guns for quite a while before his capture, but the man probably had schizophrenia, and this might have just been considered normal Riel behavior. Anyways, he was given a coat by one of the NW Mountain police officers that took him in. A few decades later, someone decided to build a statue of this scene, Riel defeated with nothing but an overcoat on. I've never been able to find a picture of the actual statue, but it stood in Regina, Saskatchewan for years. One day, someone's child got a little too close to it, looked up the coat, and saw it was anatomically correct under the coat. The child ran off to tell their parents what they saw, the parents complained to the city, and the statue was taken down, and I have no bloody idea where it is today despite days of Googling and calling around to try and find it, or just a picture of it for a paper I was writing. Where the hell is the naked statue of Louis Riel? Someone please tell me, I need to see it once in my life. Story 7. Thanks to the Dollop podcast for this, but the Willie D., which was a U.S. Navy destroyer during World War II. Amongst its exploits, the ship dragged its anchor along several ships when leaving port, fired its 5-inch gun at their own base, which landed in the base commander's yard during a dinner party, accidentally launched a torpedo at the battleship Iowa, which was transporting the President of the United States, and was eventually sunk by a Japanese kamikaze plane that was shot down and sunk, then detonated under the Willie D. Story 8. Galileo got persecuted because he personally dissed the Pope. Initially, the Catholic Church didn't mind that much about Galileo's heliocentric model, telling him to only assert it as a model instead of as fact. It was only after writing the philosophical book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, where he put Pope Urban VIII's views and arguments into the mouth of the layman character, Simplicio, that the Church took it personally. Story 9. Corporal Wojtek the Soldier Bear, served in the Polish Army in World War II. Yes, a Syrian brown bear. He saw combat, enjoyed smoking, drinking, and coffee in the morning. When Solidar were cold, he would sleep with them to keep them warm. Originally known as Private Wojtek, he was promoted to corporal after his admirable service in the Battle of Monte Cassino. Story 10. During World War II, New Zealand had sent all of its forces to Europe/Africa to battle the Germans, so when Japan entered the war, NZ felt a lot more vulnerable, seeing as it practically had no real defenses to throw back an invasion, seeing as the war was being fought on the other side of the planet. New Zealand was extra worried as we had no tanks in NZ, as we didn't produce any at this time. Our response was to develop a homemade tank built on top of an old tractor chassis. The end product was a hilariously slow, underarmed, unmaneuverable tank that wasn't going to stop any enemy force. When the tank was unveiled by its creator, Bob Semple, Parliament laughed at him, to which he responded, "Well, I don't see you guys coming up with anything better." In the end, the Semple tank never saw combat and the tanks were converted back into tractors, as it was thought they would help the war effort better that way. Saying that though, Japan never did invade New Zealand, so maybe the Semple tank did its job so good it scared Japan away. Story 11. Napoleon was once attacked by a horde of rabbits. Basically, a rabbit hunt was set up to celebrate the treaties of Tilsit, and they ended up amassing somewhere between hundreds and thousands of rabbits. Accounts vary. Anyway, the day of the hunt they set the rabbits in cages surrounding the area that they would be hunting in. They released them once everyone was set, but instead of being scared, the bunnies swarmed the hunting party. At first they thought it was funny, but then it got overwhelming and Napoleon and the others had to flee from the bunnies in a coach. Story 12. Darwin spent 3 days on the ship trying to figure out how to use a hammock when he went to the Galapagos Islands. He kept trying to get in legs first. Ultimately he had to pull it taut enough that it was totally flat and didn't swing. Also, he had no knowledge of how to send samples back to England and just randomly shoved dead animals into boxes. Often the scientist who received them couldn't even tell what the hell the samples were. Finally, he accidentally ate a bird that he'd specifically been on the lookout for, and once he realized, he boxed up the head and wings and sent those back. Story 13. The first defenestration of Prague. A Hussite priest was leading his congregation on a procession through the streets of Prague. Someone threw a rock from the window of the nearby town hall building, which allegedly hit the priest. This turned the congregation into an angry mob, which stormed the town hall building and threw 7 members of the town council out of the building's tower window, killing them. Story 14. Queen Catherine I, is known as Catherine the Great of Russia, was a massive nymphomaniac. She had Shrek so often that when she died, the French spread an epic rumor about her. So basically they said that she had a machine constructed that consisted of many different ropes and pulleys, and was built right over top of her bed. This device was designed to raise and lower a horse so that she could use the horse to pleasure herself. One day the device broke and the horse fell and crushed her, effectively killing her, all because she wanted a horse cock. This is completely bullshit. She died from old age and being sick, but the French didn't like her and everybody knew that she was a nympho, so they believed the French for years. My AP European history teacher told my entire class this in 10th grade, and it was a very memorable story that I will remember forever. Ducking Frenchies, joke, I hold no resentment against them, just think it's funny. Story 15. In the 1920s, radium had recently been discovered, and it was seen similarly to how titanium is seen now. People back then didn't know that radiation was harmful, in fact many thought it was healthy. Just like today, many radium-branded products back then quite fortunately contained no such radium. Some unfortunately did. Some were in practicum harmless, such as watches that had radium-coated paint that glowed in the dark. The production of these, however, didn't last too long, as the women who painted these watches would lick the brush to get them to a fine point. You can see where that went. Other companies had products that were all in all quite disturbing. One such company thought it would be a good idea to make a little pouch for men to store a fair amount of radium right up against their reproductive organs. Again, you can see where that went. Story 16. Andrew Jackson shared a cup of coffee, illegally imported, with Jean Lafitte and his crew one night during the New Orleans campaign, Even after he basically called him and his men lawless savages, he was exhausted from dysentery. Every battle he fought in, he did so from horseback. Reason being, he was suffering from severe diarrhea and refused to dismount his horse for fear of shitting himself. Also, many of Jean Lafitte's men didn't fight in any climactic battle. They'd wait on the outskirts of the enemy camps, wait for one or two guys to walk out into the brush to relieve themselves, and come out of the mud and slit their throats. Andrew Jackson learned this when he almost pissed right on one of their heads when he first arrived. I live 3 blocks away from the ruins of the field hospital where General Pakenham died. Thought I'd share these with you all. Battle of New Orleans wasn't even fought in New Orleans. Look up my hometown of Chalmette. Story 17. That one Finnish soldier who got separated from his squad, only carrying the emergency methamphetamines. He took like 30 of them and then went on a man rampage for 2 weeks, giving the Soviet soldier quite some nightmares. He traveled 400 kilometers, all on skis, got hit by a landmine and only ate pine buds and a Siberian jay, raw. When he was found, his heart was beating at 200 BPM and his weight had dropped to 43 kilograms. If you want to look him up, his name is Amo Koivunen. Story 18. Once upon a time, during the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, the country of Liechtenstein sent its army, all of 80 men, to guard a pass between Austria and Italy. This pretty much amounted to sitting around drinking, playing cards, and enjoying the view. However, when the time came for the army to march home, 81 men returned to Liechtenstein, because not only did they suffer no casualties, but at some point they managed to collect an Italian defector. Story 19. Charles II of Spain was unbelievably inbred. After centuries of inbreeding, the Spanish line of Habsburg was dying off due to a curse. Of course, no one knew it at the time, but all the deformities present were a result of the inbreeding. A few quick facts about Charles II. He had horrible health his entire life. He was unable to speak until age 4. He was unable to walk until age 8. His jaw was so malformed he struggled to eat and speak. His bottom teeth protruded noticeably from his top. He would constantly drool as he could not keep his mouth closed. He was never educated out of the fear the stress would be too much on his brain. He had no rules and often was covered in filth. He was believed to be infertile due to his deformities. He ordered that his deceased relatives be dug up so he could look at their remains. The autopsy of him is even stranger. No blood, tiny heart size of a nut, his lungs corroded and shriveled, intestines rotten, a single black testicle, head full of water. Oh, the wonders of keeping it in the family. Story 20. Legend has it that during the Napoleonic Wars of the early 19th century, a shipwrecked monkey was hanged by the people of Hartlepool, believing him to be a French spy. To this day, people from Hartlepool are affectionately known as monkey hangers. A French ship was spotted floundering and sinking off the Hartlepool coast. Suspicious of enemy ships and nervous of possible invasion, the good folk of Hartlepool rushed down to the beach, where amongst the wreckage of the ship they found the only survivor, the ship's monkey, which was apparently dressed in a miniature military-style uniform. Hartlepool is a long way from France and most of the populace had never met, or even seen, a Frenchman. Some satirical cartoons of the time pictured the French as monkey-like creatures with tails and claws, so perhaps the locals could be forgiven for deciding that the monkey, in its uniform, must be a Frenchman, and a French spy at that. There was a trial to ascertain whether the monkey was guilty of spying or not. However, not unsurprisingly, the monkey was unable to answer any of the court's questions and was found guilty. The townsfolk then dragged him into the town square and hanged him. Story 21. Alfred Packer was accused of killing and eating 5 other members of his Cross Mountain expedition in 1874. He was tried for murder and cannibalism, and sentenced to death. Legend has it that the judge declared, "Stand up, ya voracious man-eaten son of a bitch, and receive your sentence." When ya came to Hinsdale County, there was 7 Democrats. But you, ya ate 5 of them, goddamn ya. I sentence ya to be hanged by th neck until you're dead, 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 as a warning again reducing th democratic population of this county. Packer, you Republican cannibal, I would sentence you to hell, but the statutes forbid it. But that quote is probably apocryphal. His death sentence was overturned on a technicality and he was tried again, and he was sentenced to 40 years in jail. The University of Colorado Boulder Cafeteria Grill is named the Alfred Packer Restaurant and Grill. The grill's motto is, "Have a friend for lunch." Story 22. I don't remember specifics, but a lord in England way back, 1600s, wanted his people to start growing potatoes. The locals scoffed at the idea, so the lord started his own potato patch and started telling people how expensive and valuable they were. He had guards posted around his potato garden. However, he told the guards that if people snuck in at night, they were to look the other way. Through this method, the people started growing potatoes and, when the bad times came, they had a crop that could sustain them.